And then we can start. Hi, everyone. You're very welcome to our webinar this afternoon. So I think all of you should know me. I'm Jane Ann, the CEO of Dóchas. And we're delighted to host this webinar together with CONCORD. And I think this will be the start, I think, of a number of webinars and online sessions that we'll deliver on these key topics, particularly relating to the EU, so on the MFF and on Global Gateway. I think we have a big enough crowd joining us this afternoon. We are going to be recording it, so do share it with any of your colleagues that might be interested. I think the group that we have today is a lot of policy colleagues and those who are engaged in policy engagement, which is brilliant. And I think as we go through the next couple of months and then into the presidency itself, we're hoping to kind of roll out this series and roll out kind of, if for suitable for all employees within your organizations and those who may be interested in understanding more. So one of our key objectives during the Irish presidency is to also build the capacity of our members. So to enable you to engage more constructively in a lot of the discussions and the decisions and the events that are happening during the time. And I suppose ensure that the civil society voice is loud and engaged during the presidency itself. We've been working very closely, obviously, with CONCORD over the last few years, but particularly over the last year on both the MFF and on Global Gateway. So we rely very much on both Jamie and Laya's expertise in support, I think, in how we engage with the government here and what are some of the issues that we raise in with, I suppose, both politicians, different committees, and other key stakeholders as well. So really today is about ensuring that, you can get an improved understanding of EU processes, power structures, but in particular where we are now with the MFF and Global Gateway and what it really means for civil society going forward. And I suppose also to think a little bit around what opportunities there may be for joint advocacy, influencing or collaboration on some of these issues, which will be and are part of our priorities during the Irish presidency. And so we are open to hearing any areas where you may be interested in understanding more or perhaps coming together on particular issues that you hear about today. So with that, I'll hand over, I think, firstly to Leah, who is our expert in all things global Europe instrument related. So I'll hand over to you, Leah, and I think if anyone does have, there'll be an opportunity, obviously, for questions and discussions at the end. If there's something urgent, you can raise your hand. But we are also recording this, and really that's just really for the benefit of sharing it on those who aren't able to attend this session in particular, and so really as a resource.
And I won't be able to go into great detail because, as you know, it's a bit of a complex institutional arrangement between the different actors, the processes, and how the power plays out. So next slide, please. And also, very important to introduce CONCORD if you don't know about us. We are the Confederation working on sustainable development and international cooperation. Our network is comprised of 58 member organizations, which are either national platforms of NGOs like Dóchas or international NGOs and networks like Oxfam or Save the Children. So through them, we're representing over 2,600 NGOs across Europe and using that force to influence and do advocacy towards the EU institutions. So here on the screen, you'll see In the center, the three main institutions, and on the side, a couple of other bodies that I thought would be interesting to raise to your attention. We'll start with the European Commission, which is the EU's main executive body. So they have the right of initiative. They propose legislation, which then goes to the Parliament and the Council for negotiation and adaptation before adoption. The Commission also executes the decisions that are taken. So the Commission has 27 commissioners, one from each EU member state, and they're supposed to represent the common interests of the EU. And there are 33 directorates general. So those are the services that do the day-to-day work of the Commission. And the one that's of principal interest for us is DG INTPA, so the one for international partnerships. And if we go down in this chart, you see that once they submit legislative proposals, they can go to the Parliament and the Council. And the European Parliament has the legislative power that it shares with the Council. So they have equal legislative and budgetary powers and are responsible for the EU, equal control over the EU budget. The Parliament has 720 seats, 22 committees, and the committees do preparatory work and dig deeper into thematic issues. They can be contributing to legislative files and bringing their expertise and opinions to those, or they can do what is called own initiative reports. So these don't have a legislative quality, but they do allow the Parliament to either request that the Commission make a proposal for some new legislation, or to set out a position of the European Parliament in a different way. The main committees that we seek to influence are the Development Committee and the Committee on Foreign Affairs, so DEVE and AFET. And all of the members have a mandate of 5 years there. And if we turn to the Council, the other body in our co-decision structure, they work with the EP to amend, approve, or veto the proposals that are coming from the European Commission. So among the bodies, the Council is the only one that's explicitly intergovernmental, and the attendees are representing the position of the member states directly, the executive level. So it's often ministers, heads of state, or ambassadors in the permanent representations. They have 10 configurations and a multitude of preparatory bodies. I couldn't even make the count of how many, but ones that you may be familiar with are, for example, CODEV or COAFER. There's also RELEX, and then which is on foreign affairs, and RELEX Horizontal Questions Working Party, which specifically treats issues around Global Gateway. So the presidency of this council rotates every 6 months. You know, your presidency is coming up very soon. The clock is ticking, but there is actually a proper president of the council, and that's Antonio Costa. So he presides the meetings, whereas the presidency itself does a lot of the preparatory work behind the scenes ahead of summits, and preparing for, yes, political declarations and orientations that will be adopted in the name of the EU. So the External Action Service, which you see up here on the top right corner, I thought it would be worth to mention because it's the diplomatic service in charge of international relations. And along with the European Commission, the EU delegations and partner countries have 2 sections, one which is the diplomatic section, one which is the cooperation section. The diplomatic section depends on EEAS. The cooperation section is primarily delivering programming coming from DG INTPA, so the Commission. This is headed up by the Vice President of the European Commission and the Head of Foreign Affairs, the HRVP, Kaja Kallas. And then we have the advisory bodies. They get a bit neglected sometimes in talks about the EU institutions. That's because they don't have legislative power. They're consultative in nature only, and they advise the European Commission, Council, and the Parliament on legislative policies and proposals. So they do this by issuing opinions. That again, usually they're aligned with the policy process or legislative process, but sometimes if there are topics that are of specific interest to them, they can do own initiative opinions and adopt those. Alongside all of these actors in Brussels and in the EU ecosystem, there are many others. Networks, for example, the Practitioners Network, which is a network of implementing agencies of the member states. There's also networks of development finance institutions, and networks like CONCORD that federate the NGO sector. So let's hop on over to processes. And there are so many different processes of varying levels of complexity. I decided I would focus on just one today with you, the main one, which is called the ordinary legislative procedure. So this is the kind of standard way that legislation is adopted in the European Union between the three institutions. It's also called or referred to as the co-decision procedure. So if we start here, down on the bottom right of the screen, the European Commission puts forward a proposal. It submits it to the Parliament and the Council. And at the first reading, the Parliament adopts its position. That means it brings amendments or says that it approves. If the Council then, at the next level, who's also simultaneously reading and developing a position on the text, if the Council approves the Parliament's wording, then the Act is adopted. Story's over. If not, the Council adopts its own position and passes it back to the Parliament with explanations, which brings us to the second reading up here, where you see the first red X. The red X is in case there's a rejection. At the second reading, the Parliament can approve the text or fail to take a decision. If the Parliament rejects the text, it leads to a failure of the law, or they can propose modifications through amendments and pass it back to the Council, whereupon they will do a second reading, make amendments in their opinion, and approve the Parliament's amendments, and whereupon the Act is adopted. If they don't, they do go to a conciliation committee where they have to do a joint text together. And then that goes to a third reading collectively, and both have to approve for it to be adopted. So I know this sounds like a lot of fun, but as you can imagine, this is slow and rigid. And in practice, it's not always how the legislation is going forward. There's been a shortcut, an innovation that's been developed, which is called the trilogue negotiations. And they're an informal kind of meeting that the EU uses in the ordinary legislative procedure, where there's representatives of all three institutions, so the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission. And they negotiate to try to bring the three institutions into agreement and fast track this ordinary legislative procedure. And so the Commission is operating as a kind of mediator between the European Parliament and the Council. I think maybe Laia, when we get to her, she'll be able to say something about trilogues because they are definitely in her timeline for the MFF. Next slide, please. So on the topic of power, there's a lot that can be said, but I'll focus on mainly the Commission and the Parliament. This picture you see here is from an influencer called the MEP assistant. So MEP is member of European Parliament, where this is his vision, very subjective, of the level of influence and power that the different commissioners and their portfolios have. So you see up here at the top at S tier, which is the highest, is Ursula von der Leyen herself. As we go down, you have the Foreign Affairs and Security Vice President, the HRVP, Kaja Kallas. Down here at C level is Joseph Sikela, our Commissioner for International Partnerships. And down here, we have our friends Glenn McAuliffe and Olivier Varhelyi, who are taking care of health and animal welfare and intergenerational fairness. So you can see that issues around energy, housing, agriculture, finance, climate, economy, these are all a bit higher up on the influence level. But there is a comment worth making in terms of power in relation to the other institutions. During von der Leyen's mandate, she's now currently in her second mandate as president of the European Commission, there has been a significant increase in the consolidation of her power, not only for the Commission vis-a-vis the other institutions through the increased use of delegated acts, but also within the Commission itself and getting placements of people who are friendly to her and her political allies. And if we turn to the Parliament, which is down here on the left of the screen, there were elections in 2024. which shifted a bit the political orientation. But before going into the different groups, I'd say within the European Parliament, those who have the most power are, of course, the Bureau, which is composed of the President, who's currently Roberta Metsola from European People's Party, the 14 vice presidents, and the 5 quaestors. In addition to them, all of the committee chairs and vice chairs and group coordinators are also quite influential. So since the election in 2024, the European Parliament, European People's Party, which is like Christian Democrats, presided by Manfred Weber from Germany, are the largest group. And the second largest group is the Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, headed up by Irache Garcia from Spain. They're the first 2 largest groups currently, followed by the Patriots for Europe, the European Conservatives and Reformists group, which are leaning a bit more to the right, or quite a bit, Renew Europe, and of course we have the Greens and the left, but they've really taken a hit, as well as the non-aligned. Yes, so that's the state of play since the last elections. In the council, they don't have a picture on the screen, but the main power there, it's quite powerful in the sense that as an intergovernmental body with heads of state and ministers, they have huge power. And there's different bodies that prepare the work of the council. And the one that's most important is COREPER. And there's 2, they're Committee of Member States Heads of Missions. One, COREPER 1 that works on employment, environment, and agriculture, and COREPER 2, which works on foreign affairs, justice, economy, and finance, which is the one that we target the most. So that is, that's what I can share for now. Happy to answer any questions. And I think it's time to pass it over to my colleague, Laia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie. Yes, so I'm going to be focusing on the MFF and particularly the Global Europe Instrument. And I have taken the original agenda and kind of like shifted into 4 key questions, and I'm going to try to answer with my slides. So I'm going to be explaining where are we at right now within the negotiation process and what has changed between the previous MFF and NDICI and what we see in the current proposal, what is at stake for us, where do I see the opportunities and our added value as CONCORD and as national platforms as Dóchas, and how we are going to get there, how we're going to achieve all these changes that we propose. Next slide, please. Okay, so what has changed from the current MFF to the proposal that we have seen? So there is the MFF regulation. Now it has been reduced to only 4 headings. And when I say headings, I mean like chapters or agrupations of topics. We come from 7 to 3 plus the administration heading. And with this, we have seen also a reduced number of programs from around 52 to only 16. So the heading that we work on and that interests us is heading 3, which is Global Europe, which is the external action of the EU. What we also have in this slide, and I've linked it here so that when you receive this PowerPoint, you have it everything packaged in one only slide, is the Global Europe Fund, which is basically the vehicle to EU's external action funding, which I'm going to touch on later on. What we also have from the Commission is the performance framework. This is the performance regulation, and it looks at the overall MFF, not only at the heading 3 Global Europe. And this is a document that will come after. So it's a document that has the rules to monitor, report all the activities with indicators of what has happened during the MFF. And then there's a 4th key document for us, which is communication on humanitarian aid. So within this, there is the funding for humanitarian aid, that is 25 billion euros. I'm not going to be touching on this because this is more for boys, but just for you to know that with the package of regulations that came July last year, there was more than just the MFF, but several documents and regulations. And why I'm putting here the annexes is because one of the key elements to highlight is that the Commission has moved many of the key elements to the annexes. And they don't appear anymore into the text of the regulation per se as a recital or article, but in the annexes. Next slide, please. So in a more visual way, and if we zoom into heading 3, which is Global Europe, I try to put here a bit the changes of the instrument. So on the left side, you have 3 main blocks, which is what we have right now, is the NDICI instrument, then there's the humanitarian aid instrument, and then IPA or IPA, which is an instrument for the pre-accession countries. And if we zoom even more to the NDICI instrument for sustainable development and international cooperation, you see that the organization here is in 3 main pillars: geographic, which takes the majority of the funds, thematic, and the rapid response. And on top of that, there is the cushion of almost $10 billion. The new proposal of the instrument, which is called Global Europe Instrument, puts all this together. Basically, it merges the 3 different instruments, which means the different scopes and objectives that these instruments have now are mixed into one single pot, which is the Global Europe Instrument, and is roughly 200 billion euros, plus the cushion that you see also in green at the bottom. Also, a key change is that you don't see anymore thematic pillars or thematic programs, which is one of the main concerns that we have, which I'm going to touch on in the following slides. And if you can go back. Yes, perfect. And the last thing before we jump to the next slide is that there is a Ukraine reserve that sits outside of the MFF, outside of the pot of money for EU's external action funding, which is a Ukraine reserve of 100 billion euros. Now, next slide. So, as a summary, where are we at right now? And before I dig more into the different key stakeholders that Jamie has already presented, what we have on the table that really interests us is the Global Europe Instrument Regulation plus the annexes. This is really where the work of CONCORD has been focusing on, and that's what I'm going to present in the following slides, and also the performance framework, but mostly the Global Europe Instrument and the annexes. And the key stakeholders for this are right now the Council, the Parliament, and national governments. And I have prepared slides for the first 2, and then I'm going to be touching on the governments with the timeline. Next slide. So, what is at stake? Let me actually move my screen. Yeah, there is a lot to comment, but I tried to really summarize it as maximum as I could. And I would like to group it into kind of like big topics. One is, if we look at the bigger picture, is who is this instrument really serving to or for? The next MFF will define the EU's global role in a context of geopolitical competition, crisis, and shrinking development space and civic space. So external action through the Global Europe heading is framed as a strategic and geographical kind of like tool, not just for international development. So we see this duality here. Therefore, there is a tension between international development objectives and EU's interest. That's on one side. Now, if we zoom a bit more, I try to select some core trade-offs shaping the negotiations that are, for us, the most concerning ones, or where I see that we have the opportunity to really influence. So, on flexibility and predictability, the Commission proposes more flexibility to respond to crisis. And this element, we see it across not only the Global Europe Instrument, but across MFF and also in the performance framework. And yes, flexibility is needed, but has to be balanced with predictability in order not to undermine multi-year programming, weaken trust with partner countries, and reduce accountability and transparency, among others. So that's one key element that we will focus, as I will explain later, our activities or our advocacy on. Point B will be, and I try to put it a bit of as a question, will the Global Europe Instrument remain ODA driven and poverty reduction focused, addressing inequalities, or just a foreign policy tool driving EU's interest? kind of linked to the first point that I mentioned, because we see a shift or a structural shift towards investment, migration, security, and this risks diluting core development goals towards, as I said, poverty and inequality reduction, but gender equality, human rights, etc. The third point is missing or weakened safeguards that we see across the whole regulation. And here, what do we find is the discontinuation of thematic programs. As I mentioned before, in the current NDICI, there are clear thematic programs and streams of funding for those. This has disappeared in the new proposal, and with such is the civil society and human rights and democracy programs, for example, which risk losing the dedicated funding for those. Also, there is no spending targets or very little compared to the NDICI. And without targets, funding can shift easily towards short-term political priorities that may come and new crises. And in the Global Europe instrument, there is recognition of the role of CSO, but it needs to be much more improved and strengthened, as well as its clarity on the funding for and managed through civil society organizations. And the following point on programming, which is kind of a bit touching on what I said before of these long-term versus crisis-driven or short-term priorities and focus. So too much flexibility can lead to being reactive, but having a politicized aid, but too little flexibility equals the inability to respond to crisis. And this is why the share of programmable and non-programmable activities is a stress point for us and something that we are really trying to influence. And the last point of this slide is this shift towards financial instruments of this blended finance. So we're seeing an increased reliance on guarantees, blended finance, and private sector leverage, which risk having less grants and having a focus towards EU's economic interest. So again, this duality of the whole instrument. Next slide, please. So now I'm getting more into explaining what's happening right now with the documents that we have on the table, which are the Commission's proposal. What are the different stakeholders doing with those? Because as Jamie is saying that it's a long process, it's very slow, and actually the different stakeholders move at different paces as well. So we have the Council. They have been moving way quicker than the Parliament. They have been meeting at least once per week. So what we have right now on the table is what is called the second compromise text. They have gone through a first reading of the regulation. They have proposed amendments, and now they're doing the second reading, trying to integrate those amendments into the text. I put here a bit the timeline. I'm not gonna go into the nitty-gritty of it, but they're moving very, very fast. And they aim to finish this second compromise text and have it kind of ready at the end of the Cypriot presidency so that the Irish presidency can take it forward. And on the performance framework, that I know there is no official document yet. There's a lot of conversations around it. We are trying to influence it with amendments and analysis reports, but nothing major for now. Next slide. But if I look at the Parliament, although they are moving slower, they have several documents parallelly moving. So we have on one side, there is the MFF interim report, the opinion or the INI report that is also called, and Jamie explained. And this looks at the overall MFF, not only external action. So the file of the MFF falls within the Budget Committee of the Parliament, and there are two co-rapporteurs leading this, Muresan and Tavares. These two co-rapporteurs, they have drafted their opinion, and it has gone back and forth within the committee and other committees for opinion, and they just had the vote early this week, and it has passed. So this is on one side. If we look at heading 3 and Global Europe Instrument, this falls within the committees of DEVE, Development, and AFET, Foreign Affairs. And here we have MEP Biedron and Galler leading on this work. What they have already done is they have drafted, and they published it 2 weeks ago, more or less, their own opinion a draft report on the Global Europe Instrument. And here we see a very positive advancement and a lot of our amendments being, or key messages being into this document. And then parallelly, we have the work on the performance framework that DEVE is leading, and this is the regulation that overlooks the overall MFF. And Niels Geuking, this MP, is the one leading the work on this and pushing for it. There is an opinion, but again, they're also a bit behind on this work. Next slide. So I have not forgotten to add a slide on national governments, but I have tried to link within this timetable where do I see the work of national governments and therefore the role of national platforms. I try to highlight it in blue, and I'm not going to go through all the bullet points because there's a lot, but it's kind of like to give you the flavor of everything that is happening and how with the MFF task force we try to really bridge Brussels with the different national contexts, and it will become, and it has become actually more and more relevant as we move forward on the negotiations. So what we see from now until the end of the year is that both the Council and the Parliament will finish to have ready their positions on the MFF and on the Global Europe Instrument. When they both have their positions ready, which will be at the end of the year, then they will sit on the table, as Jamie explained, to start a trialogue with the Commission. So everyone, the different institutions or stakeholders, go to the table with an agreed position. This was supposed to happen in October, but they have already delayed it to December. And to be honest, I think they will not start until late January or February. So what we see until then is the FACDEF meeting, which is a meeting happening in Cyprus, that will bring together all the ministers working on development. And what we are doing is preparing a joint letter that you'll receive actually very, very soon, and a package of material trying to influence those. And we are linking here the work with Jamie on Global Gateway. And another key thing maybe to highlight is that since September last year, we started to put regular spaces or meetings for national platforms. So Dóchas is very actively participating so that we create this space with other national platforms to share what happens in their national context, to identify opportunities and cross opportunities as well, and share the timeline and where do we see that we can be most influential. And another big piece of work that has to do with national platforms and the national governments per se is the amendments on all the documents that I have already shared. So this is mainly discussed at the Brussels level, but it's very key to get those amendments and those documents to the national governments, because at the end, the position comes and the direction comes from the national government to Brussels, not the other way around. So if I want to summarize this slide, and I will jump now to the following one, is the work of national governments or national platforms through national governments, the visibility of the work done by them, and also the push through pen reps. Next slide. So if we jump now to, I have skipped summer because I hope we all rest, but if we jump to September to December, here the Irish presidency will be already going until the end of December. The activities that you see here is for the EUPP 6, which is the project that will change at the end of June. So the activities are TBC, but mainly the idea is to shift those activities, instead of doing more info sharing and capacity sharing and building with national platforms, to actually do more actions with them together in capitals. So that's why you see the monthly meetings, but also more webinars and visits to capitals. I put October to be determined to come, for example, to Ireland. But the idea is to do more influencing from the capitals. And there will be another FACDEF in Ireland in October. And I pass the floor to Jamie.
Did we want to open the floor for Q&A in between? I don't remember what we decided.
Sorry, I'll come in now. If anyone has any questions they would like to ask at this point, please feel free. we've left some time for it. Otherwise, we can have like a broader discussion at the end. But I was wondering if there are any questions. I know there's a lot to take in, so. No questions at this stage. You've been very, very comprehensive, Laia. It's been very comprehensive. Okay, then maybe we've passed the floor on to Jamie. Thanks.
Sure thing. So I will try not to bombard too much because as Jane Ann mentioned, we're trying to consolidate a lot of work and information into 15 minutes. So I may skip over some things, but you will, rest assured, have everything in the slides and whatever resources you need to follow up. We're also here at the Secretariat ready to take your emails or your calls. So what I would like to speak to you about now is the Global Gateway. So what it is basically, what it has to do with development cooperation and international partnerships, and this shift in the approach that Laia already alluded to and spoke about in her presentation. The challenges and key areas to monitor, kind of what's at stake with Global Gateway, especially for civil society and partner countries, as well as the opportunities for civil society to influence or be involved with the Global Gateway. Okay, next slide. Yes, so on the rationale and aims, basically the EU and the Global Gateway strategy, it's part of the EU's answer to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is a huge effort to invest in major infrastructure projects in partner countries, particularly on the African continent. It's also a systemic change in approach, which combines the development objectives and instruments with those that are seeking to push forward EU's economic interests and economic diplomacy. So the EU is adapting in this shifting landscape, one of increased uncertainty, rivalries, conflicts, also at the front door. And in terms of the EU interests and priorities, competitiveness, security, and migration are the themes that we're really hearing a lot. So the EU is also trying to seek alliances and better partnerships with middle or bigger powers, seeing the changes also in how the relationship with the United States has been evolving and like the big power rivalries. It also represents overall a more transactional approach to international cooperation. The line to take of the Commission is saying, we're moving away from charity. They consider that ODA and traditional development cooperation has been an exercise in charity. Whereas CONCORD, for years, we've been pushing for fair and equal partnerships that move beyond just a donor-recipient dynamic. But they've taken that to a next level and really gone into the transactional approach. Next slide, please. So here you'll see the 5 priority sectors of the Global Gateway as outlined in the communication that came out in 2021. So digital infrastructures and connectivity, health systems and supply chains, climate resilience and clean energy, green, smart, and safe transport, high quality education and research, and I could add to this the securization of critical raw materials. It's not officially here on the chart, but it is one of the key priority sectors of Global Gateway. Next slide, please. And then we have the 6 principles that underpin this infrastructure investment agenda. So democratic values and high standards, green and clean, good governance and transparency, work that's security focused, based in equal partnerships, and that catalyzes private sector investments. So these 6 principles are actually the basis of what the EU is now referring to as a 360-degree approach. They say that they're, in addition to the hard infrastructure investments in things like green hydrogen or ports, they also are investing in soft infrastructure and accompanying initiatives to make an overall ecosystem that's friendly for investments. So let's go to the next slide. I can show you a little bit more about this 360-degree approach. So yes, it actually doesn't, it's not a revolution in the sense that anything brand new is coming out of it. So in addition to the 6 key principles you see there in yellow and green, the aspects that are on the outer edge, like consultation with civil society and local authorities, norms and standards, including environmental, social, and governance standards, rule of law, regulatory reform, tech transfer, gender equality. These are all things that the EU has commitments to and works on and has tools to implement. So the idea is to use this wheel to accompany investments and ensure that there's an enabling environment that leads the investments to succeed. So in terms of addressing the root causes of fragility, crisis and conflict, they're looking at migration, forced displacement, issues like food security, screening risks against the opportunities you see here and on the previous slide, and attempting to reflect the EU values like gender equality, democracy, human rights, and of course, the core objectives of development cooperation, like eradicating poverty and contributing to advancing human development. But so far, in our analysis, and my colleague Borja is going to release a policy brief in the next month, looking specifically at the 360-degree approach. So stay tuned for that. But so far, we are observing a weak conceptualization, that it's, really just kind of recycling existing tools and commitments, but not explaining how these are to be used in the new infrastructure investments. And there's a weak operationalization because of this. So we don't see these lovely ideas on paper being systematically applied, but we do believe that this could be an area where there's potential for enhancing development impact in the EU investments. So this is also an area where we do see move to course correct or potentially use this 360-degree approach to improve the global gateway and some of the challenges that we see in it, which I'll get to in a few minutes. Next slide, please. And here we have a diagram just kind of presenting the main parts of the Global Gateway governance. At the top, we have the Global Gateway Board. We also have the Council of the EU, which provides policy and strategic steer and oversight. The Global Gateway Business Advisory Group, which is composed of private sector organizations. We do note, though, with a bit of concern that there's no private sector entities from the Global South. And there's the Civil Society and Local Authorities Advisory Platform, which CONCORD does sit on, and we also are part of the steering committee for this group. It's made up of 42 networks and platforms, 4 special partners, and 11 associations of local authorities. So when we look at this picture, you can see that there's not any interplay. There is a stacking, so there is a level of hierarchy of the different entities, but the coordination and interchange between them is not very well structured and not very clear. There's also no multi-stakeholder space where all of these different actors can be brought together to coordinate, exchange, collectively solve problems, and give inputs. So we do have some issues, and then also from a member state point of view, the board has only met 2 times, I believe, 2 or 3 times since the inception of the Global Gateway, and the feedback that we were hearing from member states about the meeting that took place in October was that the commissioner, von der Leyen, and the Commissioner for International Partnerships didn't stay more than 15 minutes. So the member states were left merely to exchange amongst themselves and didn't have an opportunity for real dialogue. So these are also some issues that we are bringing up at the council level because we understand that they're legitimate concerns, and they also echo a bit of a broader problem, which is lack of information, lack of visibility about how decisions are taken, and a really strong control, centralized control on the Global Gateway by the European Commission. So we can go to the next slide. And here I tried to package a very complicated funding situation for the Global Gateway into one slide and a very beautiful little house. But yeah, the Global Gateway basically depends a lot more than previous strategies for international cooperation of the EU on private sector funding. So the narrative that we hear is that Global Gateway and mobilizing public and private resources, or using public resources to mobilize and leverage private resources, is necessary to close the SDG funding gap that we all have heard about. So they're pursuing this, yet at the same time, there's been unprecedented cuts by member states and by the EU institutions to official development assistance, ODA. So these are happening at the same time. But the main sources of funding are the EU budget, the NDICI Global Europe Instrument, EU member states, financial institutions and banks like the EIB, EBRD, but also development finance institutions from the various member states, as well as the private sector. So you can see the breakdowns of the different planned investments, the grant financing. So here, grant financing is only 18 billion. And what that's usually consisting of is technical assistance grants to accompany the investments. There's also the guarantee capacity here and 95 billion of foreseen investments. So basically their aim, the European Commission's aim, is to mobilize 300 billion euros by 2027. And at the Global Gateway Forum that took place in October, Ursula von der Leyen said that they had exceeded this. But nobody has seen the figures. Nobody's been able to get the receipts and see the math that shows what exactly has been leveraged. So this answer to the financing gap, they're leveraging public finance, leveraging of private for-profit investments, using EU guarantees. So EU money is used to help institutions or agencies like the EIB to guarantee private investments. So that is making the private investments less risky because EIB and the EU would cover any losses should the project or the investment go wrong. And then with blending operations, public grants and loans are mixed with private and for-profit investment to make the latter more profitable. So we see here, profit is really becoming a central focus. And we're very concerned because a lot of eggs are being placed in the same basket on innovative financing and leveraging of public finance to close this gap, assuming that these infrastructure projects will automatically lead to development and growth in the partner countries, and that it's very much a trickle-down mindset. However, we've done some research, and I can share the links after, showing that the claims that the European Commission has of leveraging, how much each euro of public money they've put has turned into leveraged concretely private finance. The ratios are way under what they had anticipated. And in terms of showing financial additionality, so being able to say that investments that happen because of this de-risking, investments that wouldn't have otherwise happened, they're not able to really very clearly justify that. And the European Court of Auditors has had quite a bit to say about that as well. So I'll stop here because this opens a box that goes in many directions. So let's keep going. So yeah, how did we get here? How did we get here? Well, already in 2016, this principled pragmatism was introduced in the EU's global strategy. I'm not going to go through all the boxes. I would just draw your attention to where I've put these little explosions. So in December 2021, Global Gateway was officially announced, officially released by the European Commission in an official communication. Then 2 years later, the first Global Gateway Forum took place, and then the establishment of the Business Advisory Group and the civil society platform happened at that moment. Then there were the European elections, and I'd say the ramp up, or they call it the scale up of the Global Gateway, started happening in earnest after the European elections and the nomination of our new Commissioner for International Partnerships, who is a banker by trade. So we're seeing here a bit of an instrumentalization of the EU's development aid over about a 10-year period. Next slide, please. So yeah, we're looking at four kind of shifts, and I think the shift in objectives and in instruments, Laia started to cover it. If we go to the next slide, I can elaborate on how it's really taken speed since the 2024 elections. So competition is taking over a collaborative approach, the scaling up of the global gateway, so aligning the EU's partnerships with its economic foreign policy objectives, very interest-driven, economically focused foreign policy, which also lacks civil society involvement in a meaningful way because the focus is on member states, development finance institutions, banks, export credit agencies, and companies in the private sector. And the SDGs in the 2030 agenda are, of course, talked about and seen as cross-cutting, but they're not really essential framework as they were before, just rather an area for the EU to continue promoting. And DG budget is supposed to be revamping the external budget. And in all of this, we have the process that Laia is working on, the next MFF. Next slide, please. So in terms of the shift in modalities, so modalities here, we mean, how the money is allocated, yeah? They're not just technical tools. This is our position at CONCORD. They're political tools, and they determine who decides, who benefits, and who can be held accountable for EU spending. And what we're seeing is trends in decreasing use of budget support, increased reliance on the blended finance and budgetary guarantees, and also in terms of the management modes. There's been a year-on-year increase of the use of indirect management. And what that means is instead of doing calls for proposals coming directly from the European Commission gives funding to pillar-assessed entities like the UN or other, large bodies that then indirectly manage the programs and the funding. And it's up to them how much they engage with local civil society or not. So it's big programs, less administration for the EU when they do indirect management. And there's also a reform of the EU delegations happening along all of this. The shift in actors, I already mentioned, a lot more private sector. There's also a multiplication of actors involved in the major infrastructure investments. So, for example, when you have a loan or a guarantee, you have, the European Commission, you have the bank involved, you have maybe the sovereign who is getting a loan. And then you have the private companies and the various actors who are contributing to the realization of a project. So whether that's through materials or expertise, it becomes quite complicated. And this makes a challenge also for safeguarding and ensuring compliance with core human rights obligations. So it's very difficult for civil society to work with the private sector. And there's a sense that we've been kind of crowded out and don't really see an implementation role for us. Next slide. Here's just a quick visualization of the newest innovation coming out of the Global Gateway, which is the Global Gateway Investment Hub. So this was announced in October of last year at the Global Gateway Forum. And the idea is that the investment hub will align the financial tools and improve cooperation with the private sector. So enhancing the private sector involvement in Global Gateway projects and really bringing in the national governments into that through these team national bodies. It's supposed to be a clear and coordinated pathway for private sector participation, but it raises a lot of questions about if project origination is happening with European companies and then getting validated by their member states. At what point can we say this is like built with the starting point being partner country needs and priorities? This is really a short picture. It's a lot more complicated than this with the different criteria and the minimum envelopes. But for example, projects coming in through the investment hub should be 10 million minimum. So already there you see how this could maybe not be a space amenable to civil society work. Next slide, please. So here we land on our challenges and key areas to monitor. What's at stake? So the EU's commitments and values, the importance of partner country ownership and the alignment of priorities, and the promotion of EU interests, trying to kind of navigate this trilemma that the EU has of reconciling these in a coherent way to ensure that the actions are aligning with the words. And this is an issue because democracy and civic space and accountability are strategic assets, and they seem to be going somewhat under the radar, being a bit neglected with the current approach to Global Gateway. So we see the reduced scope to engage strategically. I did want to say something. I have a quote from Commissioner Sikela when he was at a budget committee meeting in November, and he said, "Today, Europe operates in a complex environment and it's constrained. Every euro spent externally should strengthen our security, stability, and competitiveness. Global Gateway is going in this direction." So I think that puts very black on white the thinking and orientation. Other issues have been the uneven rollout of the initiative and its operationalization, a really serious lack of clarity, insufficient transparency and detailed information, not only on the projects themselves, but on their financing and how decisions are being made. Again, the multiplication of actors I mentioned in my last slide, and the risks for people, planet, the EU's own reputation when they are going with a simplification drive that minimizes focus on due diligence, standards, and norms. Next slide. And for the specific challenges concerning civil society, as I said, we're no longer seen as the key partners. The value add of civil society is going through a very difficult period. Solidarity also is kind of out of fashion with some of the member states. And we're also suffering globally from accelerating shrinking space, the budget cuts, as I mentioned, the use of larger envelopes and capacity constraints. And there's a really big focus on these profitable infrastructure projects. If you're not able to prove that you're profitable, you're going to have a very hard time in the new funding environment and how we're seeing the construction of the rules of the game happening in the MFF and the Global Europe Instrument. It's very worrying. So we're trying to make sure that those rules and those criteria that are down in the legislation allow for other kinds of initiatives on sustainable and human development to also flourish and for systems to be strengthened, and not only at the service of infrastructure investments, but as part of a broader foundation. I mentioned about indirect management. So yes, the entry points are becoming less and less clear for us overall, but we don't give up. We have a vision for civil society and Global Gateway. And our vision sees civil society as enabled. So in the sense of having access to essential information in a timely manner and access to shared spaces for dialogue, learning, and organizing. As co-designers, so shaping the Global Gateway projects and Team Europe initiatives and aligning the priorities with local civil society organizations at country level. So what we can do at CONCORD or as Dóchas is from hearing from our partners, raise those voices up in spaces that we do have access to. As implementers, in terms of service provision and considering the shift on modalities with restricted funding, we do know that civil society very often fills gaps that public services, national governments have in delivering their public services. And then finally, as impact evaluators, and this is of course in the sense of being a watchdog, ensuring that the standards are respected, enforced, and that reporting is transparent, coherent, and reflecting the quantity and quality of spending and the impacts that it actually has. Next slide, please. Oh. So concretely, in terms of who we can influence around this, for the European Commission, it's mainly targeting DG INPA, the advisory platform, EU delegations in partner countries because they do have civil society contact points who have been charged with updating their civil society roadmaps and to bring them more in line with Global Gateway. So we do know that that's happening currently. So participating in consultations, evaluations, dialogue is always an opportunity there. With the European Parliament, so DEVE and AFET, as I mentioned, there's the own initiative reports and legislative files. There's also the possibility to get MEPs to ask parliamentary questions to the Commission. So these go on record and the Commission is required to answer. So yes, we try to influence those and give ideas and raise tricky questions. And for the Council, the RELX Horizontal Questions Working Party is where a lot is happening for Global Gateway. There's actually Council conclusions currently being drafted under the Cypriot presidency. And we've been very active in developing amendments and positions and outreach to the member states, both here at Brussels level through the permanent representations, but also through the ministries who will be participating in the FACDEV meeting next month. And at national level, you have, of course, the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, development agencies, DFIs. I know in Ireland's case, the situation is a little bit different. Do I understand correctly? There's not a dedicated development agency or DFI. And then there's also the team nationals, which are being put in place currently as part of the Global Gateway Investment Hub. And we've heard some good examples of well-known civil society organizations being named as civil society focal points in the team nationals. It's not a rule. It's still kind of a black box, these team nationals. But if you're well in touch with your government, I would encourage you to try and secure a place as a focal point. Even if the exact scope of your mandate or what your contribution will be can be negotiated later, try to get your foot in the door because it will be only harder as time goes on. And then additionally, participating in consultations, the evaluations, and producing policy briefs and research to start conversations, hold roundtables. That's something that we've been doing also quite frequently here at CONCORD to get our messages across. So I think that's it for me. There's another slide with some ideas on ways forward, but this is more recommendations that we have for the institutions. And we've put these into a shorter publication that's a lot more beautiful and user-friendly, which we'll share with you after today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Oh, blended finance. This is a very good publication. So thanks, Jamie. Before I just say anything, just with regards to Global Gateway, just two things I really wanted to say, and might not be clear kind of to those. I've been following this for a long time. What is quite concerning about Global Gateway, I'm sorry if I missed maybe the nuance, is that it is often being sold as a means of development for partner countries. But what they seem to be really forgetting, and which really stands out, is that the fundamentals of building a society, a community, a society that is enabled to kind of multiply these investments or kind of benefit from is not being enabled, is not happening. Because the fundamentals such as education, ensuring education, health, well-equipped and individuals, employees, ensuring human rights is just not being taken care of at all. And civil society is critical in this. The other issue is that funding to civil society to enable this is not conceived at all. And the third thing that's really worrying, and this is the link to the MFF, is that ODA money will be used to support
Yes.
Global Gateway. This is why kind of you might think, why is it here? ODA money will be channeled to support Global Gateway, to de-risk Global Gateway. And Jane Ann is here as well because a few weeks ago at the initiative of Barry Andrews, he really wanted kind of to start a conversation in Ireland. Ireland is very late to the party. It has not been involved in Global Gateway. The team national is not very active, or if at all, and because I think nationally, because of the scale of the investment of 10 million, they have not seen the opportunity for this. I know that there are some civil society actors who would like to really partner with public sector to do productive things, but no one can scale to up to 10 million. It's clearly for infrastructure. But Jane, and I don't know if you wanted to say anything, please. Sorry, I'm really stuffed up because I have a cold, so even my brains are a bit.
That's
I'm
fine. I
afraid I had to help out.
might just come in on a few points. And look, thanks so much, Jamie and Laia. I know there's lots more behind all of what you've presented there, but it gives us a really good snapshot. I would suggest I did do a presentation to the IIEA on Global Gateway about a month ago, just over a month ago. I think it's up on our website, but it's definitely on IIEA's website. I would encourage you to perhaps look at that to see kind of where we see the main kind of key points. But I think if we're looking at the IR sector and Global Gateway, and I've discussed this quite a bit with Barry Andrews as well, there's a huge level of frustration from Barry Andrews around Ireland's approach or lack thereof and engagement in Global Gateway. And I think there's two things. What we thought was interesting was that Enterprise Ireland were at on that panel as well. They saw this as a private investment initiative by the government, by the EU. And they said, I don't understand what this has to do with development at all. And that was actually the key person who's responsible and who's on the platform, the private sector platform of Global Gateway in Brussels. So, we have a situation where the civil society and local authorities advisory platform is kind of being kept in its own bubble, not really being able to engage constructively with the other platforms that have been created, and it's very much a tick the box exercise. We also have challenged, and I've discussed with Barry around the Team National, because I do think perhaps as civil society here in Ireland, that's, engaging with the government early in terms of a Team National approach and ensuring the civil society is involved in that is key. At the moment, as far as we know, there is no Team National established. It does go back to our contact in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and we're not seeing any movement on that. So I just want to kind of, although some of these structures are there, I think in reality, what we're seeing is that Ireland hasn't really kind of stepped forward a huge amount on this. And as Chantella said, I think as a country, perhaps our member state, I think we're finding it difficult to find the level of companies that are at scale to do this type of investment. The others, I suppose, that were invited, for example, it was Enterprise Ireland, it's CRH, for example, but very other kind of large scale industries. And that's the kind of level we're talking about in terms of private sector investment in Global Gateway. So just to mention that, yeah.
Thank you. And whilst Ireland doesn't vote, what this might impact is your partners on the ground. You might hear about kind of ongoings and stuff going on the ground on Global Gateway that they're not being included and that it's impacting their communities. There's some colleagues who work on business and human rights might be able to say more, but I don't see any of them here. Anyhow, maybe you can move on to some questions or comments if anyone has any or wants to come in. I was being very shy today.
No question too big or small. Yeah.